Well, I started using SAS immediately upon my arrival to the company that I worked for 11 years. That would be American Management Systems. And I started with a project for U.S. Navy, and then a project for General Accounting Office, which is now called Government Accountability Office, and then another project for Navy. And I was really very distressed by how the Navy had many different software platforms, and none of them hooked up to any of the others. Everybody was in silos. My fourth project for MS was the Illinois Department of Public Aid, and I saw there, again, a multiplicity of software packages and no connections between them. So my fifth project was for the U.S. Department of Energy, and they have roughly 60,000 articles at the time about alternative energy sources and environmental regulations and how they impinge on energy. And we needed a data retrieval system. So I built one in SAS, which was one of the favorite products of one of my customers. And believe it or not, that program still operates even today. Well, I don't know, but at least it survived until the Obama administration. I don't know about Trump administration, but we actually predated Google by almost a decade, where you could use it to search for articles based on keywords, and we took it a step further. There's a concept called keywords in context, and we developed a concept of dimensions in values. So for instance, AL could mean a variety of things, including, for instance, aluminum. But if it's preceded by the dimension state followed by a slash, then you know we're talking about the state of Alabama, rather than it might be provided chemical / AL, and in that case you'd know it was an article about aluminum. That enabled the U.S. Department of Energy to keyword tens of thousands of simulations that they had done using a system called SEAS, S-E-A-S. And they continue to use SEAS as the environmental models of the future. So that was a very successful project. I moved from there to actually working for U.S. EPA, still as a contractor. And there again, we had a situation where each of the major environmental databases was written in its own language, and those languages include Database, Focus, IDMS, DB2, an in-house software that didn't correspond to anything else. And this was the dawning of the conception that if you're an environmental administrator for a city or a state or a region or for the EPA, you wanted to be able to see the entire picture of what was going on in the environment that you select, be that cut geographic or by industry or SIC code, by chemical, by health effect. So I built a massive database that comprised air and water, and then we reached out to the other environmental databases and pulled in data on the fly, so it's current data, from the Focus, the IDMS, the DB2, the Database, and thus my customers could see all of the environmental data on one screen without having to write programs in all of the different languages that the systems were written in. I would say that was sort of a primitive environmental artificial intelligence, is presuming and taking a guess at what the user wanted, and then the user could further refine the logic. We also built a kind of fuzzy logic in there where you could key something that was close to the name of the facility. Let's say you wanted something from General Dynamics and you don't know how to spell general. it would give you suggestions, and then you could pick from the suggestions. Very powerful that way. I worked for EPA as a contractor for about 10 years, and then when I turned 40, I decided I would start my own company, and I ended up developing contracts for a dozen of the different environmental subcontractors whom we had, and I worked for SAIC and ICF and Labatt Anderson and a great many other companies. Versar was one of my favorites. Each one has their own corporate culture. Each one had their own payroll system. So I had a lot to learn to get into the environmental business with each of the individual organizations having its own environment. And that led to a career developing SAS applications for a variety of non-environmental federal agencies, including Department of Labor and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'd have to look at my resume to remind myself of all of the companies I worked for. Freddie Mac for 2 separate stints. And then as I was approaching retirement, I got a contract with a company doing work for the U.S. Bureau of the Census, and I was responsible for the design, development, implementation, training, rollout of the cost accounting system for the 2010 decennial census. And that, at the end of that, I called it a career. I've been doing SAS work all the way from when all that existed was base SAS on a mainframe up to current levels where there's SAS BI, and you can pretty much set up whatever you want in SAS with a series of point and click. And that was a lot of fun. Since the end of my census work, I've used a lot of my data processing capability to build a model of the Washington area running community, so that whenever I put on a race, and I direct about 20 races a year, including 4 full-distance 26-mile marathons, it makes scoring the race very, very easy, and thus I can produce real-time results and present awards as people finish, which is really cool, because then people don't have to stick around until the last person finishes. It's been a while since I've dealt with SAS, but recently I had the motivation to write a book, a novel, a techno-thriller, in which there's a whole lot of data analysis. And so I introduced SAS, and it may be the first time that a book of fiction actually uses SAS. And because I asked around, and I'm on the SAS-L email list, and nobody else has written any fiction using SAS. So hey, I get to claim that I'm number one. In the course of my career, I published a bunch of papers at organizations like Association for Computing Machinery and various environmental conferences around the country. But I'm proudest of the 5 papers that I presented at SAS Users Groups International, one of which won the award for Best in Show. It was a rundown of all of the different ways that you could express SAS data geographically, and thereafter, the developer of SAS Graph and SAS Map, SAS GMAP, Jack Bulkley, would always come to my lectures and sit in the front row taking copious notes. So I knew that I had reached a responsive audience, and it was great fun. It was a great run. I really enjoyed it. That's me. How about you? In the course of my SAS work, I squeezed in more than 100 marathons, and now I'm up to 185. The book, by the way, is on sale via PayPal or Active.com, and it's called The Man Who Stole the Sun. And I created a tongue-in-cheek website so that you can order it online, arlingtonsunrise.com, arlingtonsunrise.com. So now there, a word from our sponsor. funny you should ask that, because I had the 3 rules tacked to my door at my office. First one is never give up. And we invented so many ways to get SAS to do exactly what we wanted it to do. You're probably familiar with the cartoon of the pelican that's eating the frog, and the frog has its hands wrapped around the pelican's neck, and the caption is "Never give up." We spent a year trying to figure out one little bitty thing, which was, when your SAS graph is ready, we want the computer to produce a beep. And it took, I had to promise a pizza to any of my co-workers who could figure that one out. And eventually we did. We found the control character that causes a beep. But we didn't give up. We kept on trying. The second rule is that SAS is teleological, in that an error early in the program, for instance, an absent semicolon, could have devastating consequences later in the program when you don't realize it. So you always have to run the problem on paper, at least for one or two examples, and see if the results from SAS give you any counterexamples. Because you expect certain results, and we developed extensive systems for testing SAS on sample data so that we knew what we should be looking at. There was one moment in my career where we were finding extraordinarily high levels of cadmium, which is a toxic metal, but it's also used in paint. And it took several weeks, and we finally tracked it down to a multiplication factor that was supposed to be in micrograms, but it was listed in milligrams. So our results were 1,000 times too high. The third rule is always keep learning. With SAS, there's always new products out, for instance, SAS Viya. And there's always new ways to interface with SAS and new ways to analyze data. And the guys and gals that I worked with, we followed those rules as much as we could, and we ended up doing some really good pathfinding work using SAS. Well, my least favorite is ProcSQL. I've never seen a SAS result, a disastrous result, as bad as that produced by ProcSQL. In my SAS code, I tended to avoid SQL and instead do the proc sort or proc summary or proc freak, so that I had absolute control over the calculations that were involved. One of the projects that I did at Census Bureau, one of the other SAS programmers was coming up with a total population of the US of 450 million, which obviously is wrong. At the time, we had recently crossed the 300 million mark. And I really, really should have pushed and pushed to say, we've got to use proc summary, okay? Forget this SQL. We don't really know what it's doing. Let's do it on a step-by-step, on a meticulous basis where we redo the calculations in exactly the way that we think SQL should be doing it. And that way we can find where's the discrepancy. That was a major problem that really I really should have stood up and said, this is not a problem for SQL, this is a problem for proc summary. So given the importance of that particular proc I'm going to go with proc summary. That sounds like a good one. It's total, even though there are all of these wonderful interfaces now that enable you to drag and drop for individual procedures and individual data components, I think that Even if you own a calculator, you still have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and take square roots. You need to learn the base SAS. You need to learn data step. You need to learn the various procs. You can get by pretty much just knowing 7 procs: proc sort, proc summary, proc freak, proc contents, proc chart. There's one proc print. And if you can master those, then you can move on to the graphical user interfaces that make it easier to use. But those fundamental 7 procs are going to get you a lot of results. Well, when I was a kid growing up, I had the World Book Encyclopedia at my bedside, and I actually read A through Z cover to cover. I figured, I may as well have encyclopedic knowledge. So when you pick up a SAS book, read it from cover to cover. Not everything in it is going to be applicable, and not necessarily even ever, but at least you'll know where to look in case you need something in the IML or the statistical cross tabulations or modeling. It's important not to cut short your learning. That's that 3rd rule. Always be willing to learn more. There's always more coming out. SAS is one of the most creative companies on earth. It's funny that you should mention that. My customer at Department of Energy and I often lamented the fact that we had done a full text keyword-based retrieval system 10 to 20 years before search became commercial. And if we had rolled out our product to every federal agency, who knows what the top would have brought. We might be up there with Larry Page and Sergey Brin. I don't know. You have to observe the things around you that need to be done, start doing them, and then if you develop a commercially saleable product, you're in a position to take advantage of it. All through my career, I identified needs and developed solutions mostly based using SAS, and other people came up with other solutions. I remember back when I was working for Navy, and we were at my office photocopying a presentation for the next day, and I called my commander and said, here's what the presentation looks like. And we mused for a moment, wouldn't it be nice if it was such a thing where the photocopier machine at my end was linked by telephone lines to the photocopier machine at his end, and he could actually see the briefing. If that had come, if we figured out how to do that, we would have invented the fax machine. Hey, who knew? But always the best single opportunity that best single advice I can give anybody is always look for and seize opportunities. There are always moments in time that are seminal. They're gonna change things, and SAS is so powerful, so capable, and so reliable that you can use it to engineer change within your organization. That's my advice. Always learn. Oh, spasiba, Jim Ritsu, Hamnida, and Donabad. So you said thank you in Japanese and French, and I returned in Bengali and Russian. That's pretty funny. So I'll put in a plug for that, pvtc.org/thankyous with an S at the end. Yes. And and for a good time, read The Man Who Stole the Sun, www.arlingtonsunrise.com. Let me know what you think of it.